Another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. Tonight, we're live from Lake Monster 1 week in a day, or 2 days actually, before the live NFL draft coverage here at Lake Monster. We have Diante Lee joining us. He's not quite here, but he will be joining us to talk defensive prospects in the upcoming NFL draft. We'll cover the Kevin O'Connell presser from yesterday and the news today that another star wide receiver wants out from his team. So grab a Lake Monster beer and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings. Good.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. I am your host, Matt Anderson. I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Ryan Ortega. We are here live, like I said, at Lake Monster Brewing in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we are joined by none other than Diante Lee, fresh off a new job at The Athletic. Congratulations. Hello, it's nice to finally meet you. And how are you doing this evening tonight, Diante?
I'm doing well. For starters, thank you guys for having me. Secondly, and I'm just glad, to be in a position where the platform kind of grows. It gives me an opportunity to talk about some different things. And, I didn't step into football coverage with my mind particularly on the draft, but the one thing that I've definitely grown to understand the longer I've spent time in this thing is that the draft kind of gives you an opportunity to look at football on both ends of the spectrum, right? I get to look at college and the pro game and kind of contextualize things that way. So I kind of appreciate the fact that I get like a 360-degree type of view of this whole game, which I obviously love as much as I do.
Absolutely. And so for those people watching tonight and who will be listening on the podcast who don't know you, can you tell them a little bit about like your journey to this point and kind of, what got you started in, kind of covering the NFL draft?
So for me, a lot of this kind of starts on my way out of college. So I went to Sacramento State to go play football there. And it kind of became clear. I got, spent some time trying to recover for some injuries. And I think during that time, it kind of became clear that I needed to have half a mind on what I wanted to do with my life after my football career was done as a player. And I had changed majors and started studying journalism. So when I'm leaving Sacramento State, started a family then, and I came home, and obviously, after spending all this time in these journalism classes, I figured I should put it to some kind of use and started up an independent blog. Was talking about college ball for a little while, a little bit of scheme analysis, some things like that. Kind of transitioned and made it a little bit more professional looking through Squarespace and all of those types of things. And wrote something about Ohio State, which came across the Cleveland.com desk. They brought me in, did a guest spot on a podcast, and then from there I started freelancing. From freelancing through Cleveland, I got to PFF, and now I'm here. And it's kind of just been an evolving thing. So, like I said, it wasn't so much that I stepped in the door saying that being able to cover the draft for a publication as large as The Athletic was necessarily as much as it was that I wanted to make sure that I was as close as possible to talking about football with as large an audience as I possibly could, in a way that I was hoping at the time would kind of grow the discourse. So I've been very fortunate, I think, to be in positions to do so. And obviously being here with The Athletic and then being, kind of acquired by the New York Times, it gives me an opportunity to really access a lot of eyes and ears. So I'm looking forward to what this opportunity holds for me.
Absolutely. And it's a well-deserved. I mean, I've read, some of your work here throughout the years and you really do put out great content. I do love the fact that you kind of got your start, you said, in a way with the Ohio State and that piece article that you did for them. Was that the team that you kind of cheered for growing up, or what led you to write that piece specifically?
I'm an SC guy. I'm a Southern California kid. So obviously USC is kind of the flagship program for my little 500-mile radius. I won't take it personally. But the Ohio State thing was
The only reason I say that is I'm an Oklahoma guy. Lincoln Riley
Okay.
left.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Okay. I'm not. I understand. I understand.
A little bit
I
about
mean,
it. Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
but there
No.
were some great Vikings players that came from
Absolutely.
USC and UCLA and
Absolutely.
out there on the West Coast.
I'm really hoping, to the point of Vikings players that have been a part of, Southern California's great tradition. Like, I hope that Everson Griffin is in a really good place spiritually and emotionally, and mentally, and he's able to get back to contributing and doing the things that he does best, which is, playing defensive end at a high level. But to answer your question about why I wrote it, I was just thinking about that. It just happened to be one of these kind of dull periods in the off season where I was just thinking about that 2018 playoff team where they had Chase Young. You've got three and eventual NFL corners, right? Kind of led by Jeff Okudah at the time. You have Malik Hooker's younger brother. So it was just like a really special defense, right? And they ended up kind of losing at the end to Clemson. But I thought that it was a defense that should be looked at, in a scheme and kind of that 4-down single high roll, which is almost like defunct now, in football, or definitely not talked about in the same kind of way. So I was just kind of really driven to kind of talk about that, why it worked, why it wouldn't work, some of the little intricacies about it. And that was really what kind of drove me there. And through that, gets me in a Big Ten country. And now I'm here, with the Athletics. So I think it's all more circumstantial than anything.
Well, congratulations on making the Athletic. One of our best
Thank
friends
you.
in the Viking sphere is Arif Hassan, and obviously he writes for the
Yes.
Athletic as well. Does great work. He started out blogging way back when and hooked up with Daily Norseman and does outstanding work. You are
Right.
in good company, just to let you
Yeah.
know. And
Absolutely.
getting the audience of the entire New York Times, you can't beat that with a stick. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're very, very fortunate.
Diante, I just want to quick apologize here. I'm not ignoring you in the slightest. We have we're doing a live show here, and we got a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm trying to figure it out. So,
Oh, no sweat, man. No sweat
I
at all.
appreciate you sticking with us. To kind of buy us some time here, how about you tell us about some of your favorite NFL defensive prospects in this upcoming draft, especially as they might pertain to the Minnesota Vikings?
I'll kind of go with some guys at all the different position groups, right? Every level of the defense. So the defensive interior, Devontae Wyatt has been a guy that I'm a big fan of. I've been joking throughout the draft process that if he didn't have to play alongside the best defensive interior prospect in college football, he might actually be in the conversation as the best interior defender in college ball. Now, obviously, as I've kind of done some more research and we get later in this process, I've seen some things kind of bandied about with some off-field stuff, that I'm really interested in kind of sussing out, in terms of, I believe he has like some domestic disputes issues that have been reported on that I'm really kind of interested to see being hashed out and getting some more details on. So we'll kind of see how that affects his draft stock. But that's a guy that I've been really kind of interested in, him and Logan Hall. Logan Hall is one of the few guys that kind of plays as an interior defender now, but can flex out and maybe even rush off the edge. That's 6'6", 260. Got great hands, has got an ability to really get after the quarterback, plays with really kind of, plays heavy for a guy who's been adding weight basically every year in his career at Houston. I think that as he continues to grow, and I think that he has an opportunity to top out in that 275 to 280 range, that might be a dominant defensive player, by the time we get to the end of his rookie deal. So that's another guy I'm fascinated by. Out on the edge.
Do you picture him as a 5 tech?
I think, well, that's kind of the interesting thing. I think if he stays at 260, then yes, I think that he'll get flexed out to 5 technique. If he continues to add weight, or if whatever team drafts him believes that they can add more weight to him without it coming at the cost of his athleticism, I think he can be a dominant 3 technique as well.
Cool.
So you can do a good bit of different things with him, and kind of all depends on what you're doing defensively. So that's another guy I'm interested in. On the edge, Kayvon Thibodeau has been the guy I've been banging the table for since day one. I understand that his personality type might rub some guys the wrong way, and I'm kind of sympathetic to that. But if you're talking about who has the highest ceiling as an edge rusher in this class, I don't know how you can watch all of these guys' tape and not walk away from it feeling that Kayvon Thibodeau is probably the closest to becoming an all-pro edge rusher of the guys who are available in this draft. And I think that if his focus is on football the way that he swears that it is, there's an opportunity for him to be a really big difference maker there. At the linebacker spot, go ahead.
I just think like people are overthinking it.
I think so too.
And again, you overthink it for a reason, right? Like people did the same thing about Josh Rosen a couple years ago at quarterback, and it happened to be just absolutely correct, right? So there's precedents where it works and it doesn't work. But I look at this kid and I say, gosh, this is a baller, and the natural talent, and no offense to Oregon, but it's not like they're like out there putting out elite talent on the defense year in and year out, outside of maybe defense or like defensive back. I think they do a pretty good job there, but like especially on the defensive line, I don't think they're putting out great talent. So imagine putting him in a room with Andre Patterson, who we know from the Viking days here, his time here, or putting him in with like Wink Martindale or some of these guys that really develop these defensive line or edge, or whatever you can play, outside linebacker, defensive end, 4-3 defensive end. You really look at a guy who has every tool in the belt to be an elite guy.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. And to your point, I think that, again, no disrespect intended at all for the defensive staff at Oregon while he was there. But the truth of the matter is that he is underdeveloped right now. And I think a lot of that does kind of have to be, you have to kind of examine that in your projections on players, is how close you think they are to their ceiling based on how they've been coached. And I don't think that he has been coached to really lean into his best traits, which is that explosive first step, which is the ability to kind of work and bend off the edge. Not everybody teaches that as pass rushers, So getting to a place like the NFL where that is obviously the premium skill, is the ability to win with speed on the edge. I think that there's probably going to be a lot of addition by subtraction, because he's probably going to step into a building and be told by his coaching staff, all the stuff you worked on at Oregon, throw it away. We're going to give you, we're going to constrain you to the things that you do best and really lean into that. And I think that that'll give us an opportunity to see a special player in Thibodeau. Beyond that, second level guys, one of the players that I've been banging the table for since the beginning of the offseason has been Chad Muma from Wyoming. A linebacker who can really do it all. I think he plays great in coverage. He's got great spatial awareness, great lateral mobility. I think that, when we talk about the modern linebacker, especially in zone coverage, right, being able to take away those intermediate throwing windows, understanding the passing concepts that you're seeing, I think that he's great at that, and his tape shows that. He's got great ball skills for a linebacker. It's very clear that he was a safety that converted down. And then beyond that, right, like if you look at him as a run fitter, he absolutely has great pace. I think he's physical enough. I think he knows when to fit gaps, and he's a dependable tackler. So in terms of checking off all the boxes, I think he makes for an ideal day two type of pick that can probably step in and be a starter for you immediately. So that's the linebacker I'm really kind of tied to.
Well, and they must have something out. They must have something out in the water up there in the mountains, because you have Wyoming, Chad Muma. Is it Muma? Right. I think that's it. You got Troy Anderson out there in Montana.
Yep.
And just an athletic freak. Do you know much about Troy Anderson? Because I think that's a player I was interested in learning a little bit more about. I haven't watched enough on him.
So Troy Anderson's kind of fascinating to me, because I do think that there are some gaps in his game, especially as a run fitter and tackler. But if you want to talk about like ball of clay, raw athletic ability, he certainly has that. I mean, he showed it at the combine, right? Going 4.4 as a linebacker, you're going to raise some eyebrows with that. And I do think that he shows that on tape, especially out in space. So the biggest thing for him is just showing that he's dependable enough to be useful on first and second down, or against teams that use those condensed formations and really challenge you in terms of fitting the run. So that to me is the biggest question that he's going to have to answer as an NFL player. But athletically and in coverage, he certainly checks all the boxes in that way.
Amazing. That's great to hear. What do we got for cornerbacks?
For corners, I mean, it's Derek Stingley. To me, it's Derek Stingley. I've been on this since day one, since 2019. I'm not budging on it. It's not to take anything away from Sauce Gardner. I'm actually working on something with the two of them today that'll probably run by the end of this week. But again, if we're just talking about like technicians at the position, and you think about what some of these young corners have done for some of these defenses, AJ Terrell in Atlanta, Patrick Surtain the second, for Denver, like having one of those types of man coverage, one-on-one, you can turn your back, give him the best matchup, and understand that he's going to win at least half the time. I think that opens up so much for you defensively, and that's who he's been at his peak. That's not to say that some of the play hasn't been inconsistent. I just think that the inconsistency is overblown because we're kind of going from, well, if the point of comparison is 2019 where he looked like prime Revis, if that's the baseline, then, anything can look inconsistent if you're holding it up to that. So, yes, I would have liked for his entire career to have kind of tracked that way. But I still see that ceiling of number one lockdown all-pro corner there. He's actually a player in terms of Minnesota that I've been really, really interested in, especially as Patrick Peterson kind of gets a little bit older. If you want to move him inside as a bigger body to play in the slot, because I know that Mackenzie Alexander had a lot of trouble last year playing in the slot, so I know that's a position that they're probably looking to address. I think that having a guy like him, like Stingley there, you get the tutelage of Cameron Dantzler and Patrick Peterson, and it allows you to maybe extend Peterson's career a little bit because he doesn't have to work as often outside. I think that would be another really good fit for the Vikings if they're looking to add some talent defensively.
Yeah, I think so too, and so it's funny because we've had a few different draft experts on over the last couple weeks, and when you look at the different prospects that are coming in, some people love Stingley, some people hate Stingley because of the injuries and the inconsistency, as you mentioned, and the fall off from 2019 to where we're at today, and that concerns a lot of people. So McDuffie is being mentioned over Stingley, or Andrew Booth being mentioned over Stingley. Right. I love Stingley. Stingley is my number 2. I got Booth at number 3. Obviously, I got Gardner at 1. So I'm on board with you, and I think 78, 79, 70, 80% of the Vikings fans are hoping Stingley's that pick a week and a day from now. So we love hearing positivity from him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy that like I said, I've thought the world of him since 2019. I haven't really budged. And I think that, again, it was the same way we're talking about Thibodeau, right? I think that leaving some of the dysfunction that was LSU in 2020 and 2021 will probably serve him really well. We always talk about this in terms of quarterbacks and less so in terms of non-quarterback, high profile players. This is a corner that's basically played for 3 different defensive coordinators in 3 years, right? And obviously when he was with the best one, Dave Aranda, you got the best returns. So I think if you get him with another elite level defensive mind that really knows how to cut him loose and play to his strengths, we can see the same kind of returns that we saw in 2019.
Love to hear it. Why don't we go safeties, and then we'll go into maybe some specific prospects that I had sent you a list of, or Matt had sent you a list of, and we can kind of dive in. Matt, join us in a second. We're testing out sound for our live draft. So
gotcha.
Seeing if we can get this projected onto the loudspeaker. So that's really what we're doing. So
that was pretty sweet. No, man, that's a sweet deal. I hope it does work out. That'll make for a really cool broadcast idea. For safety, Lewisine, Georgia. That's been another one of my draft crushes, one of my draft favorites. Another do-it-all type. Like, I think that the common theme for me throughout this draft is guys who are versatile. And I see all of that in Lewisine. I think that him showing up to the combine as a legit 6'2", 200-pound safety, ran that 4.4 type of 40, and then you go back to the tape and you see I think that you can make the argument that Cine is pound for pound the best tackler in this draft class, especially out in the open field. And then you look at the versatility and coverage. He can play a deep half. He can play quarters. He can play in the middle of the field. He can roll down into the box. He can handle tight ends and running backs in man coverage. He's not bad against slot receivers in man coverage when need be. So I think that, again, when we start talking about the modern NFL game and how spread out it is, and how much strain that puts on safeties deep down the field. You need a guy who is athletic enough to handle some of the high level slot receivers that we see and outside receivers in the NFL. And then B, you need a guy versatile enough to be able to handle the fact that more and more teams are getting into these 11 personnel looks where they can stay in it all game, run their entire offense out of it, no problem. And you've got to be able to go do anything from fitting the run to playing a post 45 yards down the field. He's one of those guys who can do it, and a guy that I'm really excited about seeing in the NFL.
Sorry, I am back now. Who was that guy you were just talking about?
Lewisine.
Oh, okay, got you. Have you talked about Trent McDuffie yet?
Yeah. Did we? No, I guess we didn't hit Trent McDuffie. Not in particular. I'm thinking about. I was talking in a prior podcast about him.
He was talking about Daryl Stingley. We prefer Daryl Stingley over Trent McDuffie.
Derek, yeah. So with Trent McDuffie, he was a guy for a while here in Minnesota Viking mock draft world that he was like the foregone conclusion for us at 12. And then as the weeks have kind of progressed, actually really since Derek Stingley's pro day, right, when he proved that he was healthy and still a top 10 guy. Oh, the sound crapped out here. Trent McDuffie's kind of disappeared off the Vikings radar, I would say. Do you think he's a good corner? Do you think the Vikings should still be looking at him, or should he be falling down the draft boards like he is so far?
I would say so. In my first round mock, I still gave the Vikings Trent McDuffie because Gardner and Stingley were off the board on my own. They both went top 10, but I am certainly not in love with him to the same degree that I was entering 2021, and I'm probably less in love with him now over the span of January to April. And a lot of it just kind of is like the certain baselines that you just have to check to be a high level corner physically, to be sub 6 foot, sub 30-inch arms. You've got to be like a top 0.01% level performer as a corner today with how big and athletic some of these wide receivers are. It's not to say that he could never do the job, but if you're telling me that he's probably going to be too short and too small on the whole to play on the outside, play in and play out, if he's going to be inside, and we think about the type of teams, particularly with the Vikings, right? Particularly in this division, where you're going to be seeing your Green Bays, we're going to have to see Chicago and Detroit. These are all teams that are either good in the trenches or do different things scheme-wise that are going to force your defensive backs to have to tackle. And, with McDuffie, that becomes a major concern for me. Is he going to show up and run support? Is he going to be a dependable enough tackler? Is he going to be durable enough at that size to be able to deal with those types of physical challenges? It's not to say that he can't be a decent player. I just don't see a high enough ceiling to justify him being a top 15 pick at this point.
Well, and to go into McDuffie, not even really going into him more, but you have McDuffie playing in Washington. Again, they've been putting DBU, right? Like they've been putting out some high quality talent. You have his teammate Kyler Gordon. Now he does meet those thresholds. I think he is almost every bit as good as Trent McDuffie with that does meet the measurables, right? So I'm looking at Kyler Gordon. I also look at a guy, and again, who isn't meeting those measurables you're talking about, right? So Roger McCreary, who went up against the top talent in the SEC and dominated at the cornerback position all year and has done really well over the last couple of years. But now you're talking even shorter arms than McDuffie. Yeah. You're talking about the same height. So where I'm having a hard time is how much do you trust the tape over measurables? Because the tape shows that he's locking down, like McCreary specifically, that he's locking down the same high-end talent that's going to be in the NFL this year from the SEC, and he's doing a good job doing it. Why would that change necessarily just because he's going pro?
I don't think it will. And if you're asking me in comparison one to the other, I think that McCreary is somebody I'd be much more interested in as a cover corner than I would with McDuffie. And a lot of it comes back to what you're saying, right? The level of wide receiver that he has to see on a week in, week out basis, whether you're talking about Arkansas and Treylon Burks or Alabama and Jamison Williams and John Mechie, Georgia with DJ Mitchell and, some of the wide receivers that'll be pros eventually coming out of there, as well as the rest of the SEC schedule period, you're talking about a high level of competition and he delivered, week in and week out. I will say that his ceiling as a cover corner will lead me to believe that, in spite of the fact that he's a short-armed guy and lower than 6 feet in height, that he can live outside. I think that, in the mold of a Darius Williams, he can probably play in that type of role, right? Where maybe you kind of shift him around based on where you need him, as a kind of ideal secondary corner type. So I would much rather wait for him, wait for a Kyler Gordon, who is another guy that I think is really, really versatile, that can do a lot of different things for you schematically. Those are probably the guys I'd be much more interested in as another corner than going for a guy like McDuffie, where I just don't know exactly how he'll carve out a legitimate role at the next level.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. One last question, and then we'll get back into these prospects. Again, we kind of sent you a list of different prospects. We've talked about a couple of them, so we don't need to rehash all of that. But one question is, you had mentioned that you mocked McDuffie to us just because of the fact that Stingley and Sauce were gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would your thoughts be? I know it's becoming a little bit of a trend on Vikings Twitter recently of the Vikings going ahead and moving for a wide receiver in preparation. One, the fact that Thielen's getting older. Two, the value of a wide receiver and some of these contracts that they're getting right now are almost up to where these quarterbacks are. So that 5th year and the extended life on the rookie contract would be that much more valuable. What are your thoughts on the Vikings potentially pursuing that route with Ted Glover's, favorite Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave or Jameson Williams or whoever fits the mold there?
I can see it, particularly with where they're selecting, right? Like, chances are, unless there's like a major slide, a major unanticipated slide, you probably are going to be out on the best offensive tackles, the best edge rushers, and the 2 best corners, right? And this is not a franchise that's in need of a quarterback at this particular moment that needs to start right now. At least, yet there's some time for future considerations as far as that goes. So I do think that you're in a position to say we don't have to address a depth need right now. This can be a BPA type of pick. And I think that a guy like, a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave could certainly fit, especially with all the different things that this offense sets out to do on a week-by-week basis. And it would free up even more space for an Adam Thielen to do more as he ages. You can kind of create a bridge for what the next era of the offense looks like. In fact, a guy like Jameson Williams, where, even though it seems like he's on schedule in terms of his recovery, that would be a great surplus pick, because it's not like he's going to have to be cleared by week 1 in order for the Vikings to feel good about making a pick like that, right? Because you already have 2 very high-level, high-performing wide receivers on the roster. So I could certainly see that. I wouldn't hate that. The same way I wouldn't hate if Minnesota looks around and says, hey, maybe we can sell this pick to Detroit, Kansas City, Green Bay, one of these teams that has surplus draft value between 20 and 40. You can pick up some extra draft capital and kind of stock up the coffers, some depth on your roster that way. I wouldn't hate either of those approaches. So I definitely think that a lot of doors can be opened on Minnesota's behalf when it comes to next Thursday.
Yeah, I love that opportunity to potentially trade back with one of those teams, gain draft capital in that, still keep that first round pick, move back and get additional pick in the second or third or both, depending on how far we move back. And because, like I said, or I think like you said, the sweet spot of this draft is really, obviously you have the top end talent, but it's really in that 20, 25 to, I don't know, 50, right? There's a lot of quality talent that we need. We have a lot of top end talent on this team, but we are greatly depleted in depth. And, I think I saw one of our commenters, and again, thank you everyone who's listening in live with us and joining Diante, Matt, and I live. We really appreciate you commenting and keep those comments coming in. One of them had mentioned all the different needs that he believes that we have in, wide receiver, cornerback, depth at safety, depth in the offensive line, even though I think we've kind of done some of that in the free agency period, but still we're struggling there. Tight end is something that a lot of people are not thinking about because we have Irv Smith coming back, but we lost Conklin and we don't have depth there. So, there's definitely a lot of value for us to be able to pick up in this draft, and it's all prime talent right in that 25 to 50 range. So,
Absolutely.
just speaking of Primetown, obviously we brought you on today. You can talk about anything. We really don't care. But defensive talent is what we really were, talking about today. And so what I kind of did was I sent Matt and I kind of compiled this list of basically.
You can say the truth that you compiled it. I just signed off on it.
Yeah, I was saying it was his idea, and I just kind of put something together of basically each defensive position in the draft, or defensive position, defensive tackle, edge, linebacker, corner, safety, right? Those five, and then talk about one player at each day of the draft that you would be excited or think that would potentially be a good fit for the Vikings. So I again put together a list. Of course, listeners, I have about 3 Oklahoma guys on this list, obviously. But, and Diante said he didn't want to talk about one of them, which I get. It's fine. If you don't know about Brian Asamoah, you got to check it out. True 3-down linebacker. I'm a big fan, but I want to get your take. So hopefully we can catch up on that sometime. But why don't we start at D tackle? You already talked about Deontay Wyatt, which for dollar for dollar for me, I think he's the best defensive tackle in this draft. I think he's better than Jordan Davis. I know Jordan Davis got some measurables. I know he's a big boy that can do a lot of damage. I think Wyatt is a better overall player on the field. I think he can do more from a pass rushing sense than Davis can. I know Davis is a wall. So, I know you had mentioned Davis is probably your top defensive tackle talent. I think Wyatt's above him, but again, we're splitting hairs here. The second guy that I put on there, which we'll get to now, is Perrion Winfrey. Have you done much homework on him? What are your thoughts on him?
So with Winfrey, I think that if you're looking for a defensive interior guy that can really add something to your team in terms of like pass rush potential, I can certainly see it with the guy like Winfrey. I think he plays with really good hands. I think he uses his size really well. And beyond that, he's actually a much higher energy, great with pursuit, kind of high motor guy than I had even given him credit for on my first watch. So I definitely think that he can add a lot to your defense, especially in terms of depth. When you start talking about those day 2 to early day 3 types of picks. So that's certainly a guy I think that can kind of develop into being a reliable starter level player towards the end of his rookie deal and going on, to the second contract.
Yeah, when I watch him on tape, and again, I'm looking at this from a lens of bias, obviously, right? But there are deficiencies, and I'm trying to figure out, are those deficiencies due to the former defensive staff at Oklahoma, who, for all intents and purposes, they really cared about was pass rush, and they didn't really care about the run much, or is it a gap in skill or tendencies that he's developed that he maybe can't overcome? Because that is a concern. His defensive rushing prowess is not very good. Maybe it's get a full head of steam, he just wants to rush a passer or whatever. Do you think that those are traits that you can coach out of a guy early on in his career?
I usually tend towards saying yes, because especially at this position, if you don't get it together in terms of fitting the run as a defensive interior guy, you're just not going to play, right? Like, it's the same thing that we're starting to see with wide receivers and blocking. It's becoming harder and harder to be a wide receiver that's not a willing blocker, at the NFL level. You've got to be a very particular or special kind of athlete or producer to not be asked to add something in the run game in terms of blocking. And the same thing is going to be asked of him as a defensive interior guy. So I do think, when you talk about maybe being a little underdeveloped in that way, I think that certainly is something that you can say. I definitely think that they probably leaned a little bit harder into developing his moves, especially with his hands as a pass rusher, and a little bit less so of playing, slower, playing to react to the blocks that you're getting and being a more sound type of run fitter. So that's certainly something that I've kind of had half an eye on. Like I said, I'm optimistic enough to think that he can sort it out. And based on his size, I would like to believe that he can get it together, because he's got pretty long arms, 6'3", 6'4" guy, he's got the weight. I do think that he can get that together if he's coached properly. Even if he's only getting to a league average level, I think that'll be fine enough, because he definitely has a high ceiling as a pass rusher on the interior.
So sticking with the theme here, I know he just mentioned Perrion Winfrey, a day 3 guy potentially, Haskell Garrett. Can you tell us anything about him? Do you know anything about him? And would he be a fit for the Vikings?
So I would say, I mean, again, if we're just talking about just adding kind of raw depth, I think that he might be a guy, especially if we're looking at it in terms of like scheme, right? So if we're thinking about Ed Donatello's defense, kind of moving to more of a 3-4, split safety type of deal, I could certainly see you bringing him in and him maybe becoming a guy that can play the nose for you. I don't know if you're going to get much value out of him beyond that, kind of just being like a block eater type, a center eater type, and I think that he does that relatively well. He's just not, you're right, you're just not going to see anything that pops or anything that shines on his tape in terms of, raw traits or certain refinement technique wise. So I would be a little hesitant in terms of expecting him to maybe top out as anything other than what he is, especially for a guy who's stepping in is basically going to be 24 years old at the draft. There's not going to be a ton of ceiling for him. But if you're just trying to bring in a late round guy that'll be cheap, add some depth, can play maybe different spots on the defensive interior, he can certainly do that and just kind of be like a stopgap. If somebody gets hurt or you need him to fill in a spot where you're maybe lighter in depth than you had initially kind of assumed you would be.
Sure, absolutely. Is there a defensive tackle or, again, 3-4 defensive end, defensive tackle that on day 3 that you want to promote, that you watch the film and you're like, wow, that guy would be exciting for any team that looking for that, again, 3-4D and 4-3D or like 3 tech?
No, to be honest with you, nobody that really kind of that blows me away. If I'm being completely honest with you, a lot of those guys, and this is something that we're starting to see more and more. Like the day 3 guy, the idea of the day 3 guys that turn into plus starters is becoming harder and harder because the athletic baselines continue to raise higher and higher for what you have to do to be a starter level player in the NFL. So outside of like a Garrett, who I just know because I've watched him enough that he's versatile enough to play some different spots on the interior, there's really nobody else that kind of like on first glance strikes me as a guy who can step in and give kind of immediate contributions.
Before we switch to some other positions on the defensive side here, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our sponsor, Lake Monster Brewing, which Ryan and I are at right now. So if you're looking for a great beer and a great time and you live in the Twin Cities, head on over to Lake Monster Brewing in St. Paul, Minnesota, because they make unique versions of classic beer styles by putting their own subtle twists on the flavors of craft beer that drinkers have come to love. Ranging from esoteric and approachable, subtle to over the top, their beers adhere to the philosophy that there is always more to be discovered. Ryan, should we switch to edge or linebacker? Because I feel, honestly, as a Viking fan, that linebacker is probably not being talked about enough, considering that, we really only have Eric Kendricks. I know they signed Hicks away from the Arizona Cardinals this offseason, but we're without Anthony Barr. It's a new defense. Kendricks is getting older. Should we start to look at linebacker?
Yeah. Let's go linebacker. Specifically, more ends on linebacker, right? Obviously, when we look at edge here going forward, we're now potentially talking about that outside linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker now. So we're still going into linebacker regardless. But let's start with the inside backers here. I think we had sent you a couple names. I don't think we're going to go day 1 inside linebacker. However, let's say, we trade back and there's just a great value there. Nakobe Dean and Devin Lloyd are the 2 kind of projected first-round linebackers in this draft. Either of them that you are, you have a preference or you think that would fit this more 3-4 style of defense that we're going to be playing going forward?
I would say, particularly with the Vikings, I would probably be a little bit more interested with Devin Lloyd because I just think that he would add, that same type of size plus versatility playing alongside, Eric Kendricks. So that's something that I'd be really interested in. Nakobe Dean is a player that I like. Don't get me wrong. He is a player that I like, a player that I think will be good, but I kind of have to see it. He's one of those guys that I have to see it. I'm a believer in his traits. I'm a believer in his tape. I think that he would have put up some really impressive combine and pro day numbers had his pec and his legs been in position where he was 100% healthy and clear to go. I don't think that he kind of dodged out on those tests just because, he was concerned about what his numbers would have been. I really think that he didn't get the time to train that he was hoping for. But with Devin Lloyd, he's just got the raw type of size, and I think enough ability that you can talk yourself into him being that ball of clay type that you need as an inside linebacker in a 3-4 defense. So that's probably the guy I would lean with if you're talking like late day one to early day two.
You brought up Nakobe Dean, and I know that we sent it over in the chat. I've been listening every morning to, well, when it becomes available, Todd McShay and Mel Kiper, and just because growing up, they were kind of the standard for NFL draft. And Todd McShay is in love with Nakobe Dean. In fact, I think he's been on record saying he would take a top 15 pick for him. What I know you kind of listed some reasons there, but do you think that he falls out of the first round potentially into that top half of the second? I just feel like he's kind of free falling a little bit, and I know linebacker's not a real premium position, and that may also play a factor as well. But is he a potential guy that could slip from the first round and maybe the Vikings nab him in the top half?
I think it's a possibility because a lot of it is almost tied to the rest of the linebacker quote unquote market in this draft. The more that I think the Jets have cooled on Devin Lloyd, however far back he slides, I'm kind of confident in saying that Nakobe Dean is taking the same or similar, kind of 1-for-1 type of slide too. I just don't think that the teams that are at the top of the draft are particularly interested in bringing in a linebacker and using that potential 5-year contract on a guy at that position, given how much you can get out of linebacker play for cheap in today's NFL. So I would say, I do expect Nakobe to be available somewhere between, 25 and 35, if not 35 and 45. Again, it's all going to be, I think that Devin Lloyd is kind of the lever that we're looking to see pulled. If we see Devin Lloyd fall to that 25, 35 area, then I would say, yeah, Nakobe Dean probably would be about, 8 to 10 picks behind that, based on the way that the league seems to be valuing Lloyd.
And Matt, I saw you fist pump there because I think you like that opportunity.
Yes.
Just so you know, we are pick 46, and he said 45 is his limit, so I don't think it's going to
be. Damn it, Diante. Is Nakobe Dean getting the Miles Jack treatment a little bit? Because Miles Jack was supposed to be one of these top linebackers that really slid. How long ago was that? 5 years?
Yeah, well, he had that injury. That was.
I know he was coming in on an ACL, I believe, right?
Yeah. He had that injury. And of course, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the other different linebackers, Chad Muma, Troy Anderson. I had mentioned Brian Asamoah. Listeners, if you haven't had an opportunity, Brian's going to be, I think, a true 3-down linebacker, but a little undersized. He's going to be more that fit of the kind of the new age linebacker that we're seeing with the Devin Whites or whatever. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Devin White, but a true 3-down linebacker who can actually play in the coverage very well, but a little light. So we'll kind of see where that takes us. Let's unless you have somebody else to mention.
Well, I was going to two things. One, did you at least give Diante a heads up of why you're such an Oklahoma Sooner fanatic and why you're obsessed with these players all the time?
I mean, I did tell him I'm a big Oklahoma Sooner fan. But
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. So he won't let up on it. I'm sure we're not done talking about it. I saw Quay Walker brought up in the chat here by Brian Ports. Anything you have to say about him?
I don't have the greatest feel for him as a player, to be honest with you.
Fair enough. I need no more.
I kind of see him as a Devin Lloyd light, honestly. I mean, they play very similarly, in my opinion. I just don't think he's going to have that high-end potential that Lloyd does bring. But I do like him. I think if somebody said, hey, I want to take him in the second round, I'm not going to bat an eye at it, honestly. So let's move to edge or, 3-4 outside linebacker, whatever you want to call it. Obviously I saw another person mention in the comments here, because Jermaine Johnson II is from Eden Prairie, Minnesota. There's going to be a lot of fans who are very enticed. Of course, anytime we have any Minnesota product, we want to bring them home. So, of course, we had.
I think Peter Schrager started this a little bit too the other day in his mock draft.
Yeah, he has us he has him mocked to us. Again, Eden Prairie. We are obsessed with Trey Lance as well. Wasn't going to actually happen, obviously, going 3, but we love any Minnesota grown talent. I just have it on my mind.
I told you he's going to bring him back up.
It's bad. I didn't mean it. All right, so Jermaine Johnson II, obviously an older prospect, 5th-year senior. tell us about him. What does he bring to the table that, maybe some of the other, edge prospects that are going to be taken in a similar fashion, what does he do better, and why would he be a better fit for the Vikings?
I would say, well, number one, if we're looking at his best abilities, his best traits, I do think that right behind Trevon Walker, he's probably the best run defender that we have in of this edge class. You can certainly see it all throughout his from the time that he transferred to Florida State from Georgia, right? And it's no shock that a guy from Georgia will go someplace else and be an elite run defender because it seems like that's all they churn out, right? But another thing I will say is, while I do think that his ceiling as a pass rusher is kind of set where he's at, he is certainly refined in that regard. I think that he has a plan. I think he knows his best moves. He has his counters together, and I think that, again, if we're talking about bringing a guy in who can top out as like not elite, but a high level secondary rusher that is also a great run defender, I think that would be great in this type of defense. I think that for them, if you have somebody opposite Hunter, that I think that adds a lot to what you need in that base 3-4 type of package. So I can see why there would be some intrigue with him. I'm kind of up in the air between he and Karlaftis in terms of those edge rushers in that second tier and where exactly I want to slot them at. If you can kind of find a way, 12, I guess 12 is probably about that kind of debate line, which is why I'm so up in the air between, Johnson and Karlaftis and where they get drafted in the first round. I'd be fascinated to see how the rest of the league feels about Johnson. Because I do think that he is talked about as like a high floor, low ceiling type of player. And you usually don't see those guys go in the top half of the first round. But I can see, particular to what is being changed schematically in this defense, why he may be a draw for Ed Donatell and this defensive staff.
I was talking with my buddy today who's a Packer fan, and I just feel like when I look at George Karlaftis, I just feel like he's a Green Bay Packer. Like he just looks like it, right? Like I could see him in mid-January in a playoff game, just in Lambeau, like just dominating. I'm calling it here. It's 4/20/2022 at 8:48. Karlaftis to the Packers, and he's a stud. But another guy on the list that I know that we sent over to you is an Oklahoma guy. It's Nik. I don't know how to say his last name. Bonitto.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on Nik Bonitto? I mock drafts would have him upper second round. But what are your thoughts on him, and where do you think he inevitably goes in the NFL draft?
So Bonito's a really kind of fascinating guy, in today's NFL, because I think that we've kind of dropped a little bit of the premium that was there before on like the designated pass rush type. And I think that that's what Bonitto's kind of stepping into the NFL as. Great athletically, 4.5 runner, had an explosive 10-yard split. I think that some of his jumps were in the high percentile as well, if anybody uses like Mock Draftable and looks at those spider charts. So he certainly has the athleticism and the explosiveness on traits alone to kind of make you interested. And you can see a little bit of like his pass rush savvy kind of flashing on tape as well. I just have major concerns with both him and Boye Mafe from Minnesota in terms of being able to stand up on first and second down against the run. It's just not their strong suit, and it makes it really difficult early in your career to break into a reliable role on a down-by-down basis.
I mean, I'm just saying, PFF loves his rush defense. I'm just saying.
Hey, I don't work there anymore, so I can't speak to that.
Just because we are, Vikings Happy Hour based in Minnesota here, you mentioned Boye Mafe, who I think I've seen him, he's kind of climbed up draft boards a little bit. And then recently I feel like he's kind of taken a back seat. I think he's kind of fallen fringe first round, but probably most likely a second round draft pick. You mentioned his inability to stand up there on first down, but what are some other things you think about Boye Mafe in why he's kind of just had this roller coaster of a draft stock this offseason?
I think a lot of it kind of comes back to what I was saying with Bonitto, and it's just like how do you contextualize these designated pass rush guys? He plays light, and it's great in terms of like his ability to get off the ball. I think that he's got one of the best first steps in this edge class for certain, and it is intriguing. I think that my biggest concern with him is just like it. At any point, if you're running the football at him, knowing what we know about NFL tackles, NFL tight ends, and NFL offensive coordinators and how good they are, and being able to pick out the types of players that they need to run the ball at, that's my biggest concern. And then if you're looking at them from like a strictly a numbers production standpoint, you're not getting the TFL and sack production that you'd like for a guy that's stepping in as a designated pass rush type either. You would have liked to have seen multiple, 10 plus sack seasons, and I understand that the COVID season, I think, kind of cuts off a lot of these guys in terms of their production, using that as kind of a landmark for their development. So I do want to be sympathetic to them in some ways. But again, if I'm just looking at the traits plus the production and what you put on tape, the first step is great and very intriguing, but I don't think it's enough to make up the ground that he leaves in terms of showing up as a run defender. And in today's outside zone landscape in the NFL, if you can't set the edge, you're going to have a really hard time staying on the field, as a defensive end.
And that's key to a 3-4 type defense.
Absolutely. Yeah, the defense doesn't work if you can't set the edge.
Sticking on the theme of edges, is there somebody who you are willing to stand on the table for? Maybe not like a first round guy, but like day 2, day 3 kind of guy that you'd be willing to stand on the table and say, yes, go for that guy. If you already mentioned this, I'm sorry if I missed it with the sound stuff earlier.
This is at any position?
I was going to stick specifically to edge here.
If I'm sticking to edge, if it's a day 2 guy, it's Drake Jackson from USC. Another player that I think is kind of massively underdeveloped. I think that, he's probably one of them, at least in the edge class, I would say he might be the most improperly used player coming out of college, going into the NFL. You turn on USC tape and he's dropping into coverage on like, a third to half the snaps in some of these games. You have games where like he's playing in a 4-eye, so he's like inside the tackle, like he's some 285 to 300 pound defensive tackle. And then, you finally get the 10 to 15 snaps a game where he gets to be a pure edge rusher, and you see all of the potential in the world there. I think he plays with good bend. I think that he's got enough length. I think he's got enough height. He's got a great first step. I think he has a plan and he knows how to work angles. And I think that, while that 270-pound weigh-in at the combine, we should probably dismiss out of hand, because at no point at USC did he ever weigh in at that or play his full season at that weight. I think that was more of him trying to check off a box for the purposes of how he was being scouted. I think that even at the mid 250s, maybe low 260s, you can get a high level of pass rush returns for a guy like that, and a player who spent a lot of his time playing in a 3-4 defense and will be really familiar with what it means to set the edge, even though he can kind of grow as a run defender as well.
I want to come in here and just be like, all right, Homer bias over here, USC, but honestly, I'm a big fan of Drake Jackson as well. I think he, to your point, underdeveloped with that coaching staff there, and I think those edges are probably going to continue to be underdeveloped at USC. So we'll see how that ends up going. But let's move to corner. That's probably our biggest need, I think, moving forward. We talked Stingley. We talked McDuffie. We talked Kyler Gordon a little bit. We talked McCreary quite a bit. So let's only go into like 2 guys here. The first one, I want to go with a first-round pick. Let's say we trade back, or maybe even we take him at 12. Andrew Booth Jr., once projected a top 10 pick. Now, maybe somewhere from 10 to 25 is kind of his range. What are your thoughts on him and his ceiling with the Vikings here at the NFL level?
And I'll just say that Ryan, before the show, said that he would take Andrew Booth at 12 for the Vikings. Not even a trade back scenario.
Big fan.
Take him at 12.
Big fan.
To me, at least, I guess that would be ambitious for me, not necessarily because he's not good, but just because of what else I think would be available at 12. But for me, I think that he's pretty squarely the 3rd best corner in this class, in my opinion. And if you're not going to have access to Sauce or Stingley, then that's probably the guy that you would walk away with feeling the happiest about. I think he's one of the few corners that you can put inside and out and get positive returns on. I think you can play him in press or off and get positive returns on. He's a pretty good tackler. I think he's got decent ball skills. He checks all the boxes. The only thing with him is that you just haven't gotten that elite breakout surefire cornerback one potential on tape consistently enough, but I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think that he's one of those players that's going to end up having an 8 to 12 year career as a high level, cornerback, because he can do so many things. Every team in the NFL can add an Andrew Booth Jr. to their defensive backfield and make it better because of his versatility and his ability to do different things for you schematically.
And our boy J.R. Reed, or J.R. Reed, Jordan Reed, I always call him J.R. Reed. I don't know why. Jordan Reed, he comped him to Marlon Humphrey, which
I could see that.
give me Marlon Humphrey all day long. I mean,
Absolutely.
that dude. So I would love that. Let's switch gears to his teammate. So Mario Goodrich, I've seen him mocked anywhere from round 3 to round, I don't know, 4 or 5. And what I see on tape is a really good player, but again, there's others around the league or who are doing the scouting that aren't as in love with him as I am. So give me a little bit of scouting report on Mario Goodrich and any other corners that you think would be a good fit in that day 2, day 3 range.
I would say number one for me with corner, I think that I'm just going to continue to trend this way with these cornerstone positions. Like, I need to see multiple years of returns before I can really feel comfortable projecting out what the future looks like. And he's such a late bloomer, basically being like a 1 year dependable starter. I don't know if I saw enough to intrigue me in a way that would make him more than like day one special team type of player. Day one, but like when he steps in the building, not day one in terms of the draft, but a special teamer that maybe you can add just some depth with. I don't know what the returns of the ceiling looks like for a player like him. It's not like you're getting an extreme level of technician, as a coverage player. I do think that he's got some decent traits. He's just fast enough. Clearly crosses that 6 foot threshold. He crosses that 30-inch arm threshold. So if you're just talking about meeting the physical baselines in order to do what you need to do at the NFL level, he certainly meets that. I just don't think that we've seen enough from him, snap in, snap out, season in, season out, to make me feel comfortable with him as a player, even though he was an all ACC performer this past year.
I see Zion McCollum is being put in the chat here. Any thoughts on him?
None that's really strong enough to really kind of put my name behind.
Okay.
Tariq Woolen?
Tariq Woolen is a guy I'm really interested in just because of the physical. It's just the physical stature and the speed. It's hard to look away from stuff like that, right? You come up 6'3", 6'4", and you run a 4.28, 4.29, 40, whatever it ended up being. That is always going to catch my eye. He's just extremely raw. He is one of those day 3 corners that you can bring in and say, hey, if everything goes right and he gets the right tutelage, that could be a guy who ends up becoming a starter pretty early in his career. He's also a player that, hey, if he's someplace where you got to drop him in and ask him to be one of your 2 starting corners, that he could go out there and drown on Sundays. I don't know if he has the right mental acuity yet as a cover corner to really handle all the different things you're going to see from the high level NFL offenses. So that's something that I think is still a question for him to answer. But I do think he's got enough in terms of ball skills, and he's obviously checks all the boxes in terms of athletic ability and his size to be worth taking a flyer on if you get a chance to get your hands on him in round 5, round late 4 or early 5 type of situation.
I want to be sensitive to the time. It's 9 o'clock here. We have one more position group to go through. Are you still good to go?
Yeah, we can kind of buzz through safeties.
All right, sweet. So it's a 2-part question because I do want to finish off on corner. Are there any corners that, similar to my edge question, that you would stand on the table for and be like, go get that guy on day 2, on day 3?
At corner?
Catching you on the spot.
Really just Woolen. I really think it's just Woolen. That might be the one guy that I'm willing to bang the table for. Again, when we start talking about those late round types of players that you think can turn into something, you got to be talking about high level athletes who have been too raw throughout their college career to merit them being up in that day 1, day 2 conversation. So Woolen's the guy really that I will kind of put everything behind. And besides that, the rest of the guys I think are just more kind of depth pieces. And if they turn into something, they turn into something. I'm just not expecting it.
Fair enough. Well, let's quick shift to safeties here. Kyle Hamilton is obviously the big name at safety. Many thought he'd go top 10. He still potentially could. But Viking fans are probably getting a little excited about the potential that he could drop to them, or at least within range of a trade up, maybe 10-ish. What are your thoughts on Kyle Hamilton and why he might be falling? And then we'll follow up with a day 2, day 3 guy and wrap this show up.
So I truly only believe he's fallen because he ran in the low 4.5s, high 4.5s, low 4.6s in the 40. I really think it's as simple as that. I actually think that because of that, they're treating him more like, hey, how would you feel about an elite level safety, and less about just him as a defensive playmaker overall. So I think that his draft stock is probably a little bit more proper in the complete context of what position he plays, plus the type of traits and production that he has. So in that kind of 10 to 15-ish range, I think is probably rightful for him. But I still believe, I believe that the end of the season, that if you're talking about just completely positionless wise, evaluating these guys, he's the best defensive playmaker in this draft. And this tape still shows that. I haven't been given a reason to budge off of that. I just think that maybe he's not Derwin James because he's not a 4.4 runner. But that doesn't mean that he can't be an all-pro level talent. And that's exactly what I think, he has the potential to reach. Particularly with the Vikings, it's not necessarily that they have a need at the position, right? They had a rookie safety last year whose name is escaping me right now that I know. They're Cameron Bynum, if I remember right, who is tracking to be a starter this upcoming year, that I think can be a really good player. As a matter of fact, the more snaps he gets, and flashed a little bit of that at different points last season. So I'm very happy about him. You obviously still have Harrison Smith, who, will probably end up being in conversations for being a Hall of Famer by the time his career is over, based on his longevity and high levels of production too. So for Hamilton, I can see you making that pick if the expectation is, hey, we think that Harrison might be a little bit closer to hanging this thing up than maybe has been indicated prior, and we just want to have something in our back pocket in the event that he gets to the end of 2021 or 2022 or 2023 and says, yeah, I think I'm finished, and you're losing your defensive leader. I can certainly see that. But I would say that 10 to 15 is his proper draft range. I just think that if there's another corner that you can get your hands on, I would probably lean in that direction and maybe try to address depth at safety at day 2 or day 3.
I got a quick question. He's dropping because of his 40 speed. More and more NFL teams are getting in-game speed data from the GPS stuff, all the electronics they're hooking up and stuff like that. I believe if I'm an NFL team, I'm going more with that data versus can a guy bust out of a sprinter blocks, and run a 40? And we obviously don't know what his in-game speed is, but we obviously do know the production he made at Notre Dame, and stuff like that would mean more to me than just, running a straight line 40. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, when you look at the tape, his change of direction ability, top tier. His ability to get to the ball, pursuit of the football, and finish plays, top tier as well. He has great ball skills. He checked every box short of running a 4.440. That's truly it, which is the only reason why I think that he's not being mocked to, within the top 8 picks the way that he was when the offseason first began.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's transition to day 2. He's a safety that is kind of being considered maybe a slot corner. Safety, I mean, Jalen Petre, I think that's how you say it, out of Baylor. I watched him dominate against Oklahoma, so I know how good this dude is on the field. Can you walk us through what he brings to a team, the mentality he brings, all of that you see on tape? And do you think he'd be a good fit for this offense next to a Harrison Smith?
I love the player. I absolutely love the player. He's one of the guys that, again, that I've been talking about banging the table for. He's another one of those types of guys, and he's a do-it-all type. Again, with this common theme with me and defensive guys that are not corners and edge rushers having to be versatile, he fits that mold 100%. and he's spoken to it, playing for Phil Snow at Baylor, and he was more of kind of like your traditional Sam linebacker, right? And their kind of 4-3 quarters type of system. Then you bring in Dave Aranda and Ron Roberts, and he can transition to playing as a nickel corner. That says a lot about you as a player, and then he checks all the physical boxes. He is a perfect tweener size, right? Like right below 6 foot or right at the 6 foot ish area. He's got about 30-inch arms. So you're not getting the tallest, the longest, the heaviest guy, not the fastest guy, but somebody who has a high mental acuity in terms of playing in zone coverage. He shows up in run support. He'll make tackles. He knows how to cover, how to play to his help, his strengths and weaknesses. When you talk about playing like these big nickel packages or these nickel packages we're seeing in the NFL where teams want to have 5 DBs on the field against every personnel package that's not like 21, right, where you got a fullback and running back on the field. He is the exact type of player that you would look at and say, hey, if we get him, we can play nickel to everything in the world because he can stand up against tight ends, slot receivers, outside runs, inside runs, play action pass, drop back pass. He can do it all. And, an ideal type of player when you talk about round 3, round 4 value.
And he's a dog. That's the thing. He's
Absolutely.
like, and I love, like, one of the biggest things that I'll always advocate for is if you can show me, especially as a defensive back, whether you're a safety or a linebacker or a safety or a cornerback, if you're a dog, like if you got that like dog mentality, you automatically jump up in my rankings, regardless of how actual technical you are or how refined your skills are, because that dog mentality, you make one play and that changes the whole mentality of that defense. And
I mean, go anybody who is not familiar, watch Baylor play Oklahoma this past year, and then watch their 2 games against Oklahoma State. It's some of the most impressive film, period, just defensively watching Baylor. They're extremely impressive defensively. And Petrie, to that point of being able to do it all, from playing close to the line of scrimmage to out by the numbers if need be, he's one of those rare types of guys who has a great understanding of how to fit into a defense and make the most out of it. That's one of the reasons why I've been so big on him.
Fantastic. I love it. The last guy we're going to talk about, and then we'll wrap this show up. I appreciate your extra time here tonight, is Nick Cross. Nick Cross is a guy who, again, I watch on tape and I see some great, some quality tape. I see some good quality skills and traits in that perspective. And then he went out and showed out how athletic he can be at the combine. So talk to the folks that are listening here a little bit about him. Of course, we're a little bit more familiar since a lot of the listeners here are probably Gopher fans and the
right, watching them in the Big Ten, right? Yeah, so 100%. I mean, again, athletically to show up and run sub 4.4 as a safety, it's a rarity. So that immediately, kind of piqued my interest to go see 4.34. I believe he ran at the combine, and like you said, he flashes a little bit on tape. Being able to come out of the roof in the middle of the field and go play the ball in the air, that shows the speed, the change of direction ability, being able to play angles. I do think that he can maybe grow a little bit as a tackler more consistently. But I do think that he can do a few different things for you schematically in a great a great depth piece in any scheme because of his speed. The one thing I will say that kind of leaves you kind of desiring the most is just the fact that he might not be a man coverage guy, somebody who can roll down and play over, a slot receiver and in these obvious passing situations and things like that. But I do think that it can be developed based on his athletic profile. And if you're dropping him over, maybe a tight end who's not a Travis Kelce type, I think that he might be able to stand up in those situations. And at worst, if he can't, you can put him in the middle of the field and he's got the speed to be able to play from numbers to numbers, right? If not sideline to sideline. So that is something that's intriguing and maybe something good to have, at number 2 on the depth chart, some guy that you can maybe develop into becoming a dude later on down the line.
I love it. I love all the information I got tonight. And I didn't get a chance to tell you pre-show, but I don't know a ton about the draft, guys. So I'm learning with the fans here this evening, and you provided just I love following your Twitter, and you were just as advertised as you are on your Twitter. So thank you so much for showing up tonight and providing just great content and great feedback on a lot of these players.
And apologies. And apologies again for the technical. I mean, obviously, I don't think it really affected you and me necessarily while Matt was doing all that. We're testing out sound, so if folks, when folks join us here live next week for the draft, they'll be able to hear the show through the speakers and stuff. So we're figuring some of that stuff. Again, Diante, I really appreciate your flexibility with that and helping us navigate through that with some really, really great content.
Oh man, no sweat at all. Like I said, thank you guys for having me.
Hey, and we obviously know with the Reef being on the Athletic, and now Diante's on the Athletic. The Athletic is running $1 a month deal.
Yes.
If you want some awesome writing on football by some of the greatest minds in the country, sign up and you get to read Diante anytime you want.
Oh man, my bosses are going to be so happy to hear you say that. I didn't have to plug it at all, man. I appreciate you,
Dave. You forgot to mention our really good friend of the show, Chad Graff, as well, who works for the Athletic.
That's right. Chad does too.
Absolutely,
we got him as well.
Diante, the selling point for us here at this publication is that we've got all the best sports writers, man. It's something I believe in. So 100% check this out.
The content is incredible at the Athletic, and yes, I share Dave and Diante's sentiment. If you have not subscribed to that, go subscribe to it.
And like I said, they're only charging $1 a month. Folks, you can't beat that. That's not even a can of soda. You can do that for quality, superb football writing.
Diante, before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to plug yourself and anything you might be working on. So let the fans know where they can find you. In what are you working on? I assume you got something coming out here right before the end of the NFL draft.
Yeah. So for me, number one, social media, Diante Lee FB, all one word. On Twitter is where you can find me as far as social media goes. That's a great hub in terms of what I'm working on and putting out. I'll be guesting on the Athletic NFL show with Robert Mays, kind of doing the last little bit of draft prep. We're planning some things content-wise, the days of the draft, so I'm really kind of excited to roll some of that stuff out, so be on the lookout for it. Most recently, this past week, wrote something up on a first-round mock draft, so if you need something to yell at or be upset about, please feel free to go there and leave a comment. It always makes for great conversation. I'm working on a Sauce versus Stingley piece, which would obviously be really relevant for what we're talking about with the Vikings, so that might be something of interest for you guys. I believe that'll be running by the end of this week, so be on the lookout for that as well. And then, like I said, next week you can probably catch me on a bunch more podcasts, radio spots, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to kind of spread my wings now that I've got this new gig, so you'll be hearing me talk about all these guys over and over again between now and next Friday.
I love it, and I'm looking forward to that Sauce for Stingley write up this week. I will for sure view it and comment and share as much as I can. So again, thank you for joining tonight, Diante. For everybody in the chat, thank you as well. If you're listening on the pod, thank you for listening. Just a reminder, in about 9 days, we will be right back here at Lake Monster Brewing, Friday, April 29th. For the live draft show. We will be here from 5:30 all the way until the end of day 2. But that's not our only coverage for the NFL draft. We are also all NFL draft starting Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday. We will have you covered. It's all 3 days, Climbing the Pocket live coverage, NFL draft. We have all your Climbing the Pocket personalities scheduled to be on the show. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in for that fantastic show. And if you're in the Twin Cities, come join us at Lake Monster next Friday night. We have beer, we have giveaways, we have a potential Vikings jersey giveaway. And so it will be loaded with a lot of fun. So TBD on there. If there's a Vikings Happy Hour next Wednesday, we might take the week off. We might release a mock draft pre-recorded. So stay tuned for that. But otherwise, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Dave. And a huge special thank you to Diante. That's all we have. Dave, take us home.
Hey, I want to thank Diante. You've been great tonight. Appreciate you coming on. Look forward to reading more of your stuff because I did look. And also some of the stuff on PFF. And it's looking great. Tomorrow night, for those that are watching, we have Vikings hot takes. And the great Flip Mozzie and Eric Thompson are going to be debating 6 players. 6 that they think the Vikings might take in round 1. So it should be interesting. Then, of course, on Saturday, you get me and Darren Campbell, the 2 old bloggers, wrapping up the week and getting ready for draft week, baby! What do we say, guys?
Skol Vikings.
Skol Vikings! Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite aggregator. And a special shout out goes to our partners, the Daily Norseman, where the best Vikings content can be found, and to Lake Monster Brewing, home of the best beer in Minnesota. Skol, everybody.